So first we have Rabbi Jennie Rosenn, founder of Dayenu, a Jewish call to climate action, who has mobilized thousands of Jewish activists with bold political action and spiritual audacity, earning recognition as one of America's most influential Jewish leaders. Next, we have Liore Milgrom-Gartner, Deputy Climate Action Director at Adama Institute, which empowers Jewish organizations to take scalable climate actions, leveraging its extensive experience in advocacy and grassroots engagement. And finally, we are thrilled to welcome Dr. Alon, a leading environmentalist, academic, and Israeli policymaker. Dr. Tal is the founder of Adam Teva V'Din and Arava Institute. Each of the panelists will answer the same two questions, and later we will take a few questions from the audience, which you may write in the chat. Let's get started. I'm sorry, Professor. I checked it before. I'm really sorry, Professor Alon Tal. Our first question for tonight. Given the disappointing outcome of the recent US election, what are the environmental implications? Are there any opportunities or sources of hope that you can point to despite these setbacks?
And you're speaking specifically of the Trump election? Is that the specific assumption?
Yeah, we are decoding the implication of the US election. We think it's a really big shift in our political climate, and we're trying to figure out how does it affect the environment, and specifically us as NGOs of environmental movement.
So I want to start with the story, and then I will try to answer your question. When I was the chair of Chaim U'Sviva, when I had Tamar's job for a while there was a reception that was organized by the new Minister of Environment, Tzachi Hanegbi, okay? And he had 5 environmental heads of organizations give him a blessing, a greeting. And I said to him, look, Tzachi, I'm not going to give you a greeting and a blessing because I'm going to tell you what I would do if I was the Minister of Environment. Here's 10 things you need to do. And the second thing I told him he should do at the time, there was the Kyoto Protocol. I said, even though we are still defined as a developing country, we need to adopt a carbon ceiling. And I think Argentina was doing it at the time, several, and I went on to the other things. Anyway, I got a phone call back 3 days later, and he said, Alon, I listened to what you said, and it made sense, but I checked, and the United States has not ratified the Kyoto Protocol. I went, that is true, because they have a Republican Senate, nothing new in that respect. But I said, doesn't mean that we can't. He said, no, we can't be more ambitious than the United States. In other words, when the United States sneeze, we all get the flu. It has an impact, okay? But having said that, let's look at the first Trump administration, and we have experts much greater than me, just how much of a disaster it was. And I was limited to climate, but we could talk about other areas too. And the truth of the matter is although the federal government really was put on hold, and anybody went to a COP, the one in Madrid, it was a very, very sad and pitiful affair with Americans gone. But nonetheless, the states stepped up. And if you look at, for example, adoption of solar energy, it was not a bad time those 4 years. Wind also got a big push. It could have gotten better, and it was certainly had better years when Biden was the president. But I think that it's our job to take a deep breath. We're now all out of the shock and think about what can be done. And so the United States is not just the federal government, it's 50 states, and many of them like California. In fact, when Jerry Brown was the governor, he went and represented California as the 5th largest economy in the world in the COPs. So I would like to hope that even though these are not the best of times, as Charles Dickens would say, they also don't need to be the worst of times. And I'll start with that.
Thank you, Professor Alon. Rabbi Jennie Rosenn would like to share some insights as a founder of the Dayenu organization from the US election. Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, thank you. It's wonderful to be with you all. I'm the founder and CEO of Dayenu, a Jewish call to climate action. And Dayenu is the only national Jewish organization working exclusively to mobilize the American Jewish community to address the climate crisis. We like to say with spiritual audacity and bold political action. And I want to talk a little bit, as you asked, about the implications of the election and also what is still possible. Because as you said, Alon, it's devastating and there is still real possibility. So one thing I'll say is this was not really a climate election in a certain way. In terms of how folks voted, climate voters and Jews broke really hard for Harris. And there was real progress made. There were 5 states where environmental ballot initiatives triumphed. So I think all in all, actually, support for climate solutions is strong across the political spectrum. Having said that, the Trump election and what is really a Republican trifecta, as we say in the States, not to mention the Supreme Court, is devastating. There's no way to mince words here. Trump is going to try to roll back the Inflation Reduction Act, something that we and many others worked tirelessly to bring about. It's horribly named the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, but what it is truly historic investments in clean energy. So there's going to be an attempt to claw that back. Having said that, that might not be so popular because as much as I think $165 billion of that funding is actually in Republican states. Texas, fastest growing wind. So will that actually happen or not? Hard to say, but there's no question that Trump can unilaterally take steps to slow spending. He can use all sorts of federal regulatory powers to hamper the rollout process. Mm-hmm. And even beyond the IRA, there are a lot of climate levers that he can pull that will have devastating effects on the environment. And those will be easier because of the Supreme Court, which has already undermined federal climate action, even before Trump has come in. He will throw his support behind the fossil fuel industry. Drill, baby, drill, right? That's his motto. And while this wasn't a climate election, it was in no small part funded by the fossil fuel industry. I think the New York Times found that the oil and gas interests donated $75 million to Trump's campaign. And Trump is likely to give the industry a real boost, talking about reopening more of Arctic drilling. And on the other hand, I will say there's not really a market or the time for more drilling. As some people say, like we've drilled about as much as is needed, and whatever rhetoric there is, clean energy is faster and cheaper, and only more so by the day. So, how much will that actually happen and how much of that will be rhetoric? He will likely abandon the Paris Agreement and undermine global efforts. And the chaos that he wreaks will reach beyond the US. I hadn't heard that expression before, Alon, about a sneeze and the flu, but yes, his reach will be far. And I think the tariffs that he's talking about will also upend energy markets, right? And the majority of solar panels and electric vehicles and all of that, a lot of that comes from overseas. He is going to wreak havoc on the federal agencies. People in Washington in these positions waiting for the guillotine to come down. Project 2025, if you haven't had a chance to look at it, don't read it before you go to sleep. Sweeping blueprint developed by conservative groups, former Trump administrative officers, and it's really harrowing. Christina Figueres, the United Nations climate chief, as you know, from 2010 to 2016, she said the result from this election will be seen as a major, major blow to global climate action. But there is an antidote to doom and despair. It's action on the ground, and it's happening in all corners of the earth. So what are those sources of hope and opportunities? Really quickly, we will be joining with many other groups and communities across the country to try to fight and keep Trump from overturning all of these hard-earned climate legislations, his attempts to dismantle environmental protections, his giveaways to the fossil fuel industry, to massive stripping of American people's rights, our rights to raise our voice and our communities and our collective future. And it will be incumbent on us to show up with our allies in solidarity for genuine democracy and justice and equity. I'll say that the communities in the United States that are hardest hit by the climate crisis are the very same communities that Trump is preparing to target. So while the outlook on the federal level is bleak, 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 the view from the states is better. Democrats, most, though not all Democrats, are real champions of climate action. They hold a trifecta in 15 states. This is an all-time high. In the past 5 years, many of these states have passed sweeping climate legislation, ambitious emission reduction tactics and targets. So state action cannot fully offset federal failures, but it is our best bet for meaningful positive action. So while we're trying to stop the bad on the federal level, there will be real opportunities to build the good and advance real climate solutions on the state and local level. So I'll just say, you know, to wrap up to this very, very big question, federal overreach may make that more difficult, but it will still be possible. And in fact, I will say it will be essential. In states, we need to make up as much ground as possible. And that means really prioritizing policies and programs and projects that expand and accelerate climate solutions and ensure that those solutions are reaching communities that need it most. So accelerating climate solutions on the state level, which is going to take a lot of political muscle in order to really make that manifest. And that can still happen. EFSHAR on the federal level, EFSHAR on the state level.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rabbi Jennie Rosenn, for giving us hope in this difficult time. Liore, would you please share your insights about the post-US elections and give us some advice?
Yeah, so as was elevated, I get the honor of being a resident of the state of California. And it was a couple days, I think, after the election that I read an article about Governor Newsom, the governor here in the state of California, calling an emergency session so that to prepare for the Trump administration. And in it kind of talked about how the state of California is preparing many of the ways that both Alon and Rabbi Rosenn talked about, preparing for the months and years ahead. And it was the first time I cried. Two emotions hit so hard. One of them was gratitude. Like, not only do I live in the United States of America, but I live in California, where the protections of people, of land, of water, of climate are real, and we won't stop. And on the other hand was the deep sadness, because I remembered. And 4 years ago, I was actually with an organization called California Interfaith Power and Light that focused on advocacy. And I just remembered how hard it was during the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, and the work that felt impossible on the federal level, and elevating the work that could happen in California. But it was those two feelings of immense gratitude and deep sadness. And it was the first release of and actually maybe the only, but it was the cathartic release that really happened in the election. I think the other speakers spoke really elegantly, kind of in the big picture. So I'll focus a little bit on how Adama is reflecting on this moment. I have the privilege of running the Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition, which is an initiative to support Jewish organizations across North America and the world. It is fun to see a couple coalition members on this call who are engaging seriously on climate change. We are committing, right? Part of joining is saying that climate change is real, it is human caused, and therefore we can do something about it. And finding a way on an individual level as institutions and also collectively to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions. I am delighted to share this initiative was launched barely 2 years ago. Over 400 organizations have joined. And at this point, it's in multiple countries, Israel, even Uganda, in over 41 states in the United States of America, in some states where there are probably even just a few thousand Jews. But there are Jews who in all of these states are saying climate change is real and we can do something about it. So what am I getting at? That whatever is happening on the federal level, we as Jews are acting on climate. Not even just individually, and the individual is powerful, but as entities, as federations, as synagogues, as JCCs, as camps, as the foundation of what makes up the Jewish community, we are saying climate change is real and we can do something about it. All of these organizations are creating climate action plans that talk about how to expand their impact beyond, and that's working with organizations like Dayenu on advocacy. It is looking at their own emissions, at their facilities. And that will happen year after year. We will move the needle on what it means to be a Jewish organization and collectively achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions. And what happens at the federal level is important. And so, like, as Rabbi Jennie referenced, right, there's the Inflation Reduction Act, which passed and went into effect January 1 of 2023, was the most critical legislation to provide incentives for nonprofits to take serious climate action. The craziness that is the American government, there are a lot of incentives that the federal government offers to taxpayers, to corporations, to businesses, to homes, to individuals, to do things like weatherize and install solar panels, undergo energy efficiency measures, great pieces. But nonprofits in America don't pay taxes. And so for decades, we weren't eligible. And so now the change was in 2023, it was that nonprofits get to access this through what's called direct pay with the Inflation Reduction Act. That's at risk. It won't stop us because we were able to take on climate action in 2022. We'll be able to keep going. And the piece that we're doing and that we're moving now is to collect the stories. How is the Jewish community, how are we tapping into the federal rebates? What does it mean? So that we can be storytellers and advocates, not just for us, but for all.
Thank you, Liore. I'm so proud that I'm proud to be a Jew after what you said, so thank you. We are moving on to our second question. What message or advice would you give to your counterparts here in Israel? Which theories of change or action have you found most effective? We are speaking a lot about theories of change in Israel, and we are trying to find what can work for the best. So we are really eager to hear your answers. Who would like to start? Alon.
So first of all, I will give one additional point for the first question that I skipped, which was very important. And that is the United States is an important country, but Europe is also very, very important. And Europe has not yet thrown up a white flag. Europe has its Green New Deal. And on January 1st, 2026, the carbon border adjustment mechanism goes into effect. It's already being phased in terms of the paperwork as of 1st of November 2023. And this means that anybody who wants to export goods into Europe that have excess carbon footprints will have to pay a carbon tax. Now, I don't think that's going to change. And when we look at President Trump's inclination or his weakness for tariffs, all of a sudden American goods are going to be taxed because they're going to have a high carbon footprint. I can't imagine he's not going to respond, and China might respond. And sure, we might get finally the monetization of carbon that we've been looking for a long time at the global level. And that's happening soon. 2026 is, less than 13 months away. So let's hope that Europe can maybe lead to a virtuous cycle. Now, with regard to what we can do and theories of change, I just want to tell another story. When Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Accord, it was a very sad day. Now, it's very difficult for me, given my own political affiliation, to say something nice about a Likud politician, but I'm going to do it anyway. And that's because Dr. Yuval Steinitz at that moment was in Beijing. He was the Minister of Energy. And without even checking with Bibi, he immediately tweeted, "The United States may have left Paris, but Israel is all in." He had just recently received an award because he phased out coal, and so he was feeling pretty good about that. But the point that I'm trying to make is that tragic polarization between right and left that the United States has fallen into, where the Republican rights tend to be almost automatically knee-jerk against environmental policies and the Democrats are the champions, that does not yet exist in Israel. And we had a good example of that for a while, at least, in the Knesset recently with the climate law that came up, where all of a sudden a member of the coalition, Yaakov Asher, gave a lot of latitude and listened a lot to the organizations. Now, the fact that his final proposed law is pathetic and anemic and something which I think we should oppose is not the point I want to make. The point is that we have allies in the coalition. And so my advice in terms of theories of changes, do everything you can not to make the environment a partisan issue. There are allies on the other side. Gila Gamliel cares about the environment. Go talk to her, get advice. As we look to, and it looks like we're going to be heading down to a horrible spiral once again after another round of the judicial reform or whatever you want to call it. Don't let the environment fall into that thing, because it's too much is at stake here. You have allies on the other side, and I'm not sure the Minister of Environment is one of them, but there's plenty of people that you can talk to, and make sure that you don't find ourselves American in that sense, where we've allowed the right wing or to hijack their partisan ideology. As somebody who grew up was a little boy, there was a president called Nixon. He passed the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, NEPA, all these things. It's unimaginable. He talked about overpopulation in the State of the Union address. And those days, sadly, are gone in America. They're not gone in Israel. Hold on to it.
Thank you, Alon. I hope we will not slide to this polarization as well here. Rabbi Rosenn, would you like to continue?
Yeah, it is one of the big differences between how climate plays out in the States and in Israel. I was at the Nathan Cummings Foundation for about 10 years in the early 2000s and part of the Green Environment Fund, helping what was then kind of a burgeoning climate movement in Israel. And it's just amazing to see how far it has come. I mean, just seeing all of these folks on this call in Life and Environment, which was, certainly around in the early 2000s, but this whole sector is in such a robust and powerful place because of all of your leadership. So I just wanted to start by saying that. I also would not deign to give advice, especially, the political landscape that you are facing in Israel is, I'm sure we could draw similarities, but it is profoundly different, and you are best positioned to really know what is needed in Israel. What I can share is some of what has been most effective for us here in the States, and a few of the, I think, underlying foundational elements that I think are good things to keep in mind. So Dayenu is a grassroots Jewish climate movement across the United States. It's multi-generational. We have over 100 Dayenu circles across 36 states, tens of thousands of folks who are coming together to build Jewish people and power to bring to the climate movement. So we work in very close connection with lots of other Jewish organizations and with lots of other climate organizations and with other faith groups. So I think this idea of really finding powerful partners and building relationships across differences is really important. I think cultivating grassroots and figuring out what do people need to be able to really take action. How do we move people from the angst that they feel to real action, and to action that is going to help us move the needle? So I will share, and so Dayenu then engages the grassroots in campaigns that we design depending on the moment and the political situation. So for example, helping to pass the Inflation Reduction Act, we joined with lots of other folks, big actions outside of senators' doorsteps, calling on them for bold climate action, helping to elect climate champions. All Our Might campaign is around getting Jewish institutions to screen out fossil fuels from their investments. We had big wins this spring with the first federations in Oregon and the Reform Movement, which is the largest denomination in the United States. So I think about four things that underlie, or that four foundational building blocks. One is urgency. This is a scientific reality. Climate scientists tell us we have less than 6 years to avoid the worst of climate devastation and to build a clean energy future. We face many issues. You face many issues. And I would assert that the climate crisis is the most existential, and that it's incumbent on us to figure out how do we communicate to our people and communities and institutions and governments that rising temperatures and sea level and severe weather events, these aren't going to wait for us to resolve other issues. And as Jews, we have faced annihilation and crises throughout history. We know how to hold a lot of crisis and grief simultaneously, and we have to. Science is not going to bend to our schedule. And we need to mobilize our people to action and give them the tools to do that. And this brings me to the second, which is systemic solutions. Given the scientific realities of the climate crisis, we can't afford incremental change. Like the time frame for that has passed. This is not about individual behaviors or one solar panel at a time. Of course, we need solar panels. Of course, we need to change our behaviors. But that itself, reducing our carbon footprint, greening our homes and schools and hospitals, that will not be enough in the time frame that we have. We need to build collective power for systemic solutions. So what does that mean? It means things like, how do we get our governments to stop drilling and burning fossil fuel? How do we get them to build and transition to a clean energy future at scale? How do we advocate for policies? How do we move money? How do we change our political landscape and elect the kind of courageous leaders we need to take climate action at the speed that we need? So I would say systemic solutions, and those look different places, but really thinking about what's going to move the needle, not what car are you buying, what car is Detroit, which is where our cars are made, what kind of cars are they building? The third is justice. The climate crisis affects everyone, and it does not affect everyone equally. Historically marginalized communities, both in the United States and globally, are those who are hit, as we say, first and worst. So how do we ensure that the solutions we're building center those who have contributed least to the climate crisis and bear the brunt of the impact most? And then finally, it's sort of the twin to the urgency, is to ground ourselves in possibility. It's not just about deny or delay. The D word that I think is most pernicious right now is doom, is succumbing to a kind of nihilism or doom. We hear it especially from younger generations. It is not too late. And we have the power that we must lift up. We have to take the mantle of that power to envision and then to bring about a different kind of future, one that's more equitable and more sustainable for all people for generations to come. So we don't only need to ensure that we can continue to live L'dor Vador, but to really hold fast to our collective power to do this. We don't have to do this alone, but it's going to take all of us. And how do we ground ourselves? One of the things, and I'll close with this, that Dayenu works from the beginning when we launched 4 years ago. How do we build spiritually rooted activism? Whether that is grounding in Jewish history and wisdom, whether it's sustaining ourselves through song or new Jewish climate arts, we have to be able to sustain ourselves for the long haul. And really find solace and community together. And certainly for Americans right now, that is something that people are desperately needing. And I think without that, we're not going to be able to do the work that this next era is going to require of us.
Thank you. Thank you for emphasizing grassroots, coalition, justice, spirituality. Lior, which kind of advice can you give us? Which theory of change did you find most effective?
I'll start with a mantra and then go into a theory of change. The mantra at Adama, and in particular with the climate action team, is climate inaction is expensive. Waiting to take action on climate is ultimately what's going to hurt the pocketbook, and think bigger, not just for any given person, any institution, but for the world. And when you see as climate disasters hit, right, those dollars, the amount of money that we are spending to deal with the ramifications is painful, not just because it hurts so much in the moment and the devastation is so much, but we in the field know that if we had just engaged or spent those dollars wisely in advance, we could have really and can continue to avoid the catastrophe that we're experiencing. So for us, like the mantra is climate inaction is expensive, and then we are guiding communities towards taking meaningful climate action now. And it's actually funny, Alon, I think it is you at a Jewish Federations of North America webinar years ago talked about federations moving some of their endowment towards solar. And we use that clip when we talk about climate inaction is expensive, being that some of the smartest investments right now are in climate solutions that are reducing daily operating costs. So climate, anyway, so that's one. And it's fun to be with you here, Alon. The other piece that really, the theory of change that we engage with the coalition is keeping organizations committed. It is, as Jenny spoke, like the spiritual intensity of the moment is real. We understand that people may ask, well, what does it matter? What can I do? What does it matter if we are in? And so we create a program and a space for organizations, movements to stay like, we're going to stay in the game. We're going to do 1 year at a time. We're going to put one foot in front of another, and collectively, we are going to make enormous change. Jenny is right, like one synagogue, although let's even be extreme, like one synagogue decarbonizing, like that's lovely, and we will celebrate that. Like that's not enough. What happens when entire Jewish communities decarbonize? What happens when all of the camps are sourcing their electricity with 100% clean electricity, that they're all electric, that they're, right? When we take individual actions and expand it to the Jewish people, then, oh my goodness, then collectively we are making change, and then we tell the story. We become models for all faiths in the United States. We make moves across the world. And how we do that is by keeping people in, giving them space and opportunity to figure out what meaningful action is for them. And then year after year, we are going to make a difference. It's short, but that's what keeps us going.
I want to thank all the panelists for your insights, and we are opening the floor for questions from the audience. All right, Eric.
Thank you very much. Of course, to Alon, but also to voices that we've heard less in the past years. And my comment first is that the Jewish people have the knack of taking on impossible missions throughout human history. So what I think is missing is the fact that let's not just talk American Jewry, Israeli Jewry, and so on, but let's turn this into a global movement. Let's be the tipping point. Let's be the voices that will cause others to fall into rank with us, because that's what makes change. And another thing is we have to always remember, with all respect to all the things we've been talking about, we need to learn to talk the dollar talk. We need to learn to use the tools and the weapons that those that are against climate change are using, and to show them that it's wrong. And Liore, you brought the example of insurance of events. So let's take aside the loss of people's lives and the loss of environmental sites. That's what we care about. But let's put it into their words. It costs you more to fix the problem after it explodes than if you would have invested in preventing it at the very beginning. And if we can get that kind of message out together, and my only question is, I would love for us to collaborate both on the global level as environmentalists, but also to collaborate as the Jewish people. This could be the perfect bridge for so many problems that are now existing between Jews around the world, where the environment could be a bridge connecting us and giving us strength that will also give us a lot more connection with each other in the future. So I'd love to hear if that's something you'd like to be doing. And if so, there's 150 organizations here that are just waiting for the chance.
Eric, if you can present yourself in one sentence and direct the question.
Okay. So I'm a board member of Chaim V'Sviva, of the organization, and I'm the director of EcoOcean, which deals in protecting the environment the marine and coastal environment in Israel. And just the one little thing, if you remember the oil spill that we had here, we were a very important component in cleaning that mess. Thank you.
Can you direct the question to someone specifically?
The question is...
For everybody.
Yeah, do we have a rally call? I mean, can we get organized? Can we find ways of getting organized? I think we can help each other.
So we'll take one answer because I want to give other chances the opportunity to ask. Who would like to answer?
I can jump in a little bit and share that the Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition is indeed open to everyone across every Jewish organization across the world. But more, I think, targeted to your question is that a community of practice, and I was not prepared specifically for this question, but there's a community of practice that is formed of global jury, maybe is the organizing entity to engage on climate. And there's are mostly, I mean, we have representation from American Jewish climate organizations, Australia, Israel, and I think that is a space where that is specifically being addressed to try to organize us and communicate best practices, and indeed kind of create a unified voice and a rallying call. It's young. I think collectively it's we've met maybe only 3 or 4 times in the last few months, but it is a beginning.
Thank you. Tamar and then Maya. Tamar, please start by introducing yourself.
I'm Tamar Wandberg. I'm also a board member and actually the board chair. I used to be a Knesset member for 10 years and the Minister of Environment. And I'm actually thinking, things in Israel have really deteriorated in terms of the general politics in the last 2 years. Actually, we did a public opinion poll in Ben-Gurion University about 2-3 months ago and found that the political divide over climate is not as divisive as in the US, but we do see some Americanization crawling into the Israeli discourse. And we feel that climate, doubt and political diverse is part of a bigger story targeting, the truth itself. And of course, within its science and knowledge and everything that's, it's not right against left, and it's not, there are like right-wingers that support maybe climate, but it's part of a story where you're no longer on the issues, you're on identity and where you identify yourself. The question is, do you find that identifying climate action with the general progressive, liberal, Democrat identity is also a strength? Are you forced to be where you are, or do you see that also as a tool? Because we are debating within ourselves whether, and I think Alon touched on that a little bit, should we deny ourselves from our general camp? Can we? Is it also an advantage rather than a liability? Or how do you see your position as climate activists within the general, politics or political identity or camp?
Jennie, it sounds like you should answer.
Yeah. So that is such an excellent question, Tamar, and it's actually the most sophisticated articulation of it I think I've ever been asked or heard, really. And there's not a simple answer to that, because I think that it cuts both ways, as you're alluding to. Like, halavai that we lived in a world where everyone understood the implications, the urgency, and were oriented towards similar solutions and towards similar villains, for lack of a better word. So I think we are, and I think this is often lost in the American discourse, as I said, some of the places with the most accelerated transition to clean energy are red states, are Republican. there are states with Republican governors who have some of the most forward-looking climate policy. So it is not black and white. And I think that has to really be lifted up, because the rhetoric can often, as has plagued America in recent years, the rhetoric is so heightened and the identity politics are so deep that it's really important to lift up those examples, like Texas and the transition to wind. The fact that inflation reduction money is in so many red states. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, the solutions that we orient towards have to be rooted in our core values. And the people who we mobilize with and our understanding of the fact that they're really, like the fossil fuel industry, it is really, for lack of a better word, a villain in this. And our analysis has to be realistic about that, and has to be realistic about the power of money and how much the Trumps and Mansions of the world, who are not actors to address the climate crisis in positive ways, are in the pockets of the fossil fuel industry. And that's a very real, talk about money. That is very, very real. And I'm sure you've read and learned a lot about the role of money in American politics, which has only gotten worse. So to pretend that all solutions are equal and all people will benefit, I think, and particularly when you talk about then what is the role of grassroots community groups in actually crafting those, where is the inflation reduction money going? Who is it benefiting? Who is being most harmed? Who's being, undermined in this work? What are the kind of tech bro solutions that people hold on to at the expense of actually investing in the community responses that are going to move us forward and accelerate? So that is where some of the political values-rooted, justice-centered, partisan divisions, I think, are really important. And it can't be in all of the above. All of the above, there's so much greenwashing because everyone knows the climate crisis is a problem. That's no longer the question. Even people who deny it, I honestly believe, know it's an issue. Their analysis might be different, but we're past the point of is this a problem or not? Almost everybody in America, I think it was 95% in the last year, have had a direct impact of an extreme weather event caused by the climate crisis. So we're now into the point of what's our analysis? What are the solutions? Who are we centering? Who's benefiting? And who are the bad guys? And the last thing I'll just say is I think there's a strange reluctance sometimes to name bad guys. And I actually think as a religious people, I should not say that to a group of Israelis, as the Jewish people rooted in tradition, in a whole history of values. For some people that's religious, for some people it's peoplehood. We know from bad guys, this is part of our understanding of the world, and we should not be afraid to stand up and give voice to the values and morals that this moment calls for. And I think one of the unique roles, and we have seen this at Dayenu, the power of being a Jewish climate group is that we can be inside and outside, protesting outside of the White House, 1 year, and the next year I was on the inside celebrating for the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. And we can really lift up our moral voices and come from a place of integrity with that. And we need to flex that power.
Wow, thank you. Maya, please present yourself and direct the question to someone specifically.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank you all. This is so interesting and so important, and it's a very good thing that we're doing this. So thank you, Alvit and Uri and Niran for initiating this. And I do think that this conversation, which is recorded, should be sent out to Jewish organizations and to communities, because a lot of people will want to join in, Israelis and Jews from around the world. And I think this is really connecting with many things that we're trying to create here in Israel. And I'd love to speak with you about this at a later time. My name is Maya Jacobs. I used to be the CEO of Tzalul. Tzalul means clear in Hebrew. It's one of Israel's leading environmental organizations for marine preservation, dedicated to very activist action against pollution of all kinds. And I have a lot of experience with pollution and with greenwash and with whatever you want, a lot of battles. And in the past almost 3 years, I left Salul and I established Climate Net, which is networking to net zero. And the focus is on creating science-based innovation from Israel and a real change. We have to have impactful change. We need to have as many solutions as possible. And this is Israel's position. Just this week on Monday, we had the biggest event ever on carbon removal and sequestration, which is the main focus that we're putting on, and on
Well,
carbon
we don't
trade.
have a lot of time, so if you can.
Yes, I'm sorry. It's all relevant. It's relevant. So what I want to say is that there's a lot of basis for collaboration in all aspects, in all angles, through opportunities in business and in public education and in Jewishness and in wellness. And we really can do an amazing international campaign here. I have lots of ideas. Arik and I are actually working already on an Israeli initiative, which we'd love to present to you. We could do a similar event like we're doing now to present you the Israeli side, because there are a lot of potential collaborations for us all to do. And I suggest that we do, joint events. But I wanted to ask you a few things. First of all, how do you think the reaction would be to a name called the New Zionist Project? Zionism has become such a word, and we can actually fit in here the whole thing with anti-Semitism as well. And the first Zionist project was the establishment of the State of Israel and why we needed the State of Israel. The second Zionist project was freeing the prisoners of the Zion prisoners, the Asirei Zion. And the last one is now saving the world. So, Zionism has become such a bad word. How do you think the reaction to that would be? And okay, that's a summary, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, I'm sorry, Alon, I speak with you often. So the question is to the other two colleagues, please. I would love to hear both of your attitudes towards these.
We have time only for one, because we need to have time for Yosef
okay, sorry.
as well, and then we'll wrap up. Yeah. Liore, would you like to take it? Yeah.
I think I missed the specific question, but to this idea of engaging with what's going on in Israel and the tech, the grassroots organizing, all of it, for the ways that you all are leading on climate action, and something that is deeply important to Adama. And at our core, we engage with peoplehood and planethood. Right? The planethood being the essence of Adama and connecting to the earth, but deeply, right? It's on the peoplehood, which is the Jewish people. And so this question of how to build this bridge is deeply important. We are leading multiple trips to Israel with American environmentalists to better understand, to connect with the earth, to connect with all of the organizations and people, Maya, that you referenced. And there's another piece about it, which I'm not a brand strategist. That's my husband gets to do the lead on that. But this question about New Zionism does ring interesting to me, and I think is also what we're leaning into with our broader programming. Adama hosts the Jewish Youth Climate Movement and an initiative called Adama on Campus, which is bringing at the forefront environmental and climate engagement to youth, and so that there is a safe and a safe space, a space full of pride, where these teens and young adults for whom being Jewish in the broader space, be it campuses, being in schools, has become a little trickier and harder. And engaging on climate is a place that feels genuine to our morals, and meaningful and relevant to the other identities that we all hold. So thank you for asking.
Thank you, Liore. Yosef, you're the last one.
Okay, to that. Like, I guess with Arik, it's no surprising that I'm the second Israeli American who's thrilled that we're having this conversation. I actually think we should do it, several times a year, and to trade ideas. It's just the beginning. And there's two things I want to pick up on. One, Rabbi Rosenn's call about naming the enemy, naming the evil player, and the role of money in politics. fossil fuel money in politics in the U.S. And we don't speak that language here, but the truth is that a lot of the money from the fossil fuel industry that influences and essentially controls the finance ministry, which controls our energy policy, is coming from the U.S., whether it's mostly Chevron or it's money that goes to Kohelet. And so I do think that there's going to be room for working together, because if that American money didn't, in fact, our political system, I think, would be in a very different place on climate. So I hope we get to do this more often. My question, and it's self-critical. I'll just talk about me rather than the whole movement. But I sometimes get the feeling, even though we have amazing people, this board of Chayim V'Sviva, 150 organizations, and we can praise ourselves and we can be proud of what we've built. But I still think we're speaking to ourselves. I still think we're speaking to a very small segment of society. And I wonder if the two of you have examples from the US. Sorry, Alon, same thing. I get the privilege of speaking to you a fair amount. But what's a Dayenu circle? Like, what does that mean? And did it expand your reach beyond sort of the hardcore of the hardcore? Like, what is that? Or what's this coalition? Is it just like, are you just speaking to yourselves, or have you found that you're able to go and bring more and more people in? Because I think our movement is not engaged with the broad masses of Israelis. So any wisdom you have would be appreciated. And yasher koach, really, for having the session.
Yosef, can you share one sentence about yourself before the answer?
I do climate. I do the third thing that Rabbi Rosenn spoke about, climate justice in Israel. Co-chair a Bedouin NGO, and privileged to serve on the board of Chayim V'Sviva. Solar, other stuff.
All right. Rabbi Rosenn.
I'll jump in. I'll jump in on this one.
Go ahead, and then I will.
Yeah, it's a great question. So again, this will be perfect to close this out. We have, just thinking about the coalition, I think 80 organizations in New York, 40 organizations in California. That's great. Like in California and in the Bay Area where I live, like one day that's going to be 100, 200, everyone will join, but I'm not worried about them. What excites me so much is that yesterday, in a community of practice with JCCs, there was somebody from the state of Alabama, and she said, she's like, I'm engaged, like I care about climate, but other people don't. How do I get started? Like, right, music to my ears. I stayed quiet, but we had two coalition members, one from different JCCs in Southern Florida, and they're like, oh, I know that problem. I felt the same way a year ago, and this is what I did. And now not only are they coalition members, they've applied to the Climate Action Fund from Adama, and they have changed out their light bulbs, they're redoing their HVAC, they're looking at their land, and they could tell the story from the first person, that they too felt like an island around climate, and now their entire community is changing. That we're closing out. So the answer is like, yes, we have our own little bubbles, and because like we are shifting the norm, and we're making space for those for whom engaging on climate feels foreign and maybe even a little scary, we're making space for them to enter. And that, over to Jenny.
Thanks, Liore. So I think, in America, more than 80% of American Jews are either concerned or very concerned about the climate crisis. And that was a statistic from several years ago. So it has gone up since then, since that study was done. But most folks aren't engaged. So it's not about converting people to be concerned about the climate crisis. It's about how do we actually engage them in action, and how do we engage them in actions that are the kinds of things that are really going to make change. So Dayenu circles, as you asked about, Yosef, are small groups in synagogues, in neighborhoods, in hillels who come together, train up. Part of it is giving people the tools. How do they organize their people and bring them into campaigns? And as Liore said, to demystify it and to make it accessible to folks. And so building a grassroots movement is the same as you build any grassroots movement. It's how do you create a vision, but then really give people the tools to bring their neighbors in, to bring their friends in, to bring their other congregation or Hillel members or whoever is in their community in, to take meaningful action and to do it in community. And I think that's the last thing I'll say is that it can feel so daunting and so overwhelming. People feel almost shut down by how overwhelming it feels. And so to be able to do it in a community rooted in Jewish community together with partners beyond the Jewish community, and then for it to feel good, to feel like this is something that I can do positively that contributes and that is really making a difference, that it is strategic. We often say at Dayenu, strategy and spirit, those need to go hand in hand. And I'll just, close by saying, Dayenu, and it's always a risky thing to, I'm sure Israelis hate Americans play with Hebrew so flexibly in a way that does not stay true to the language. Dayenu is named Dayenu because it has a double entendre, like we've had enough, urgency, the climate crisis, and we have enough. We have what we need to address the climate crisis and ensure that everyone can have enough. And part of mobilizing people beyond the usual suspects is empowering people with that sense of possibility.
Wow, thank you. It's time to wrap up. And I want to say a huge, huge thanks to all the panelists for your insights. And let's keep engaged, let's stay motivated and try to tackle the most complicated challenge of our time. So thank you so much. And we are moving to Hebrew and continue with our session. Goodbye to you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Laila Tov.
Thanks, man.
Alvit, the stage yours.